While we're on the topic of the economy, joining us now, White House senior advisor Anita Dunn. It's very good to have you this morning. We have a lot to cover with you, but we'll stay on the economy, Anita, and start there and ask, given the world crises at hand and other factors that may be outside of the control of this White House, what should the American people be prepared for pertaining to the economy in the months ahead?
Well, good morning, Mika. It's great to be on with you today. You know, what the American people should be prepared for and what they can look to is a president who has put in place an economic plan that is going to work for them as we move forward, that is going to build an economy that works from the bottom up and the middle out, not from the top down. And if you look at the four major pieces of economic legislation, his plan that he has put in place since he became president, the rescue plan, the infrastructure plan, the CHIPS plan that was signed this week, and then the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, which we are hopeful the House will pass tomorrow. What you see is an effort to lower prices on things that people really depend on, like prescription drugs, like energy costs, an investment in manufacturing that has already caused a larger growth in manufacturing jobs than we've seen for a long time in this country, and that will allow us to make it in America so we don't get the inflation from supply chain problems that we've seen since the beginning of the pandemic. It's really what they should expect is to see, we believe, continued progress, but, always a few bumps in the road, but continued progress in an economy that really works for the people who work for a living in this country and not just the wealthiest people.
I want to ask you about the big headline of the day, of course, is all the different legal woes confronting former President Trump. Many around President Trump are suggesting loudly that the search for classified records at Mar-a-Lago was coordinated somehow with the White House. Does the White House have anything to do with what happened at Mar-a-Lago in the past 48 hours?
Mika, when Joe Biden ran for president, one of the things he said the most often on the campaign trail, I'm sure you heard him say this, is that he would restore the rule of law to this government. Part of the rule of law is that the Department of Justice is going to conduct these investigations free of any political interference, free of the White House telling them what to do or orchestrating anything. And that is what this administration has done. So Attorney General Merrick Garland has the independence to do what he needs to do. And this White House gives him that independence because that is the way government is supposed to work.
Well, then the question is about transparency. I think many are calling for that. And the question I have for you is, do you think the DOJ should be more transparent about what happened? There is a lot of dangerous surmising going on, and many on the far right saying that this raid, they call it, was a declaration of war. Should the DOJ explain what's going on?
Mika, as I've said, and I'm not going to go further than this, the DOJ, the Department of Justice, is going to conduct its investigation independently, and we at the White House are not going to direct this in any way.
All right, and Anita, let me ask you finally. Obviously, President Biden, as you know very well, I don't have to tell you this, has been on a very successful legislative run, and looks like the Anti-Inflation Act is going to be signed into law. But that's just going to, you look at VA, you look at the gun legislation, you look at the bipartisan infrastructure bill. He's probably done more legislatively than any president, maybe since Ronald Reagan. Maybe LBJ. I'm curious, what's next? What's the next goal for the White House legislatively? How does he leverage these successes with his next step moving forward?
So Joe, it's good to be with you. As you point out, this has been an extraordinarily successful 18 months of Joe Biden's presidency. And what's notable about it is the number of things that have been done in a bipartisan way, as well as those bills like the Inflation Reduction Act that the Republicans refused to vote for. But if you look at the veterans bill that he signed yesterday, the PACT Act, to deal with veterans and their families who are suffering the after effects of being exposed to burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan. if you look at the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, if you look at the CHIPS bill, also signed yesterday, which is going to give us the tools we need to compete in the future and to make it here in America, the president will build on this. His unity agenda, which he laid out in the State of the Union, laid out things that he feels that Democrats and Republicans should work together on. So addressing the continued opioid crisis that we have in this country is one of those things that he believes we should work together on and that we can work together on. Cancer and ending cancer as we know it. Again, something very bipartisan that he believes everyone should work on together and that he will continue to push. And he will also continue to work towards an economy that really does work for the working people in this country. So I think building on this legislative agenda, you can see a continued focus on those things that unify this country, and also pushing forward on things that have yet to be done. So, you know, he has used the assault weapons ban as an example of something where we really need action. 75% of the people in this country believe that we should abolish assault weapons, not let them be sold to 18-year-olds, for heaven's sakes, who can't even buy a beer. That is something that I think we will continue pushing forward on as well.
Well, it's been quite a successful run. White House senior advisor Anita Dunn, thank you so much for coming on the show this morning. We really appreciate it.